Okay, good morning everybody and welcome. My name is Michael. I'm part of the D23 team. There are two other members who I think they're running around at the moment, Sarah and Terence, so I'm sure you get a chance to meet them throughout the day. But I will hand it over to our two principals, to Beth and Cameron, and welcome to those who are not Dwight teachers. We hope that you enjoy the day today. A lot of planning's gone into it. Let me say a lot. So we have no doubt that it's going to be a great day for everybody.
Good morning. My name is Beth Overby, and I'm the lower school principal at Dwight Seoul.
I'm Cameron Forbes, the upper school principal.
We'd like to welcome you to our annual Professional Development Conference D23, an event powered by EdEvents. This year, our theme is Strengthening Communities. At Dwight Seoul, we see community as one of our greatest strengths and a source of great pride. With our community being one of our philosophical pillars, we value how diverse perspectives can strengthen our common goal of building a better world.
As educators, we understand and value the need for continued growth and development. Strengthening our own practice strengthens our community and also benefits our students. With that in mind, today is a day of professional learning for all members of our educational community. We want to connect with our community members here from Dwight Seoul and also fellow educators from the region.
This morning, we begin D23 with 3 keynote speakers who will each provide a fast-paced session. These sessions will serve as an opening for their 90-minute workshops this afternoon. First up, we have Jolene Lockwood. Jolene is a certified Dare to Lead and Daring Classroom Facilitator for best-selling author Brené Brown. She has over 19 years of coaching and consulting experience, specializing in building and sustaining leaders who cultivate courageous school cultures. We are excited to have her here to kick off D23 Strengthening Communities, so please welcome Jolene.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. Hopefully I won't trip. That would just be my imperfection showing. It is so wonderful to be with you here today. It is my sincere, humbled, and I'm so inspired by what you all do every day. And so we're going to kick it off with a little bit of Daring Classrooms and a little overview of what that might look like and sound like for you. So this will be a little bit of interactive. I'm not going to just lecture at you for 25 minutes because that's not my belief about teaching and learning. So get ready to interact with someone next to you in the next 25 minutes, okay? So with that, I'm going to ask you to think about what inspires you to continue to keep teaching, because this is absolutely the hardest profession on the planet, and I would dare anyone to argue with me differently. You are literally herding cats every day. No one has more responsibility than what you are doing, because the other professions in the world would not actually be here without great teachers like you. So one of my teachers that I've continued to be inspired by is my mother. This is my mother at the age of 82, floating down the middle of the Grand Canyon for 16 days, still having the desire and the passion for this kind of adventure. Whenever I think I can't do something, I literally think of my mother, who runs circles around me, and think, what can I continue to do to inspire others as well? So my position for you as a facilitator is to be your guide alongside, just like my mother is a guide alongside, and hopefully we'll provide you with all the maps and tools and supplies that you need to get down this journey to dare greatly. So I want to be sure you know where this research comes from. Dr. Brené Brown and the Brené Brown Research Group has been doing this work for over 30 years. She's a social worker and researcher. She loves her research, and so these are the books that she's written. Her most recent one is Atlas of the Heart, which is actually an atlas to navigate your emotions, and they've identified about 87 of them. We're going to dig into the one that's Dare to Lead, and Dare to Lead is the curriculum that the Daring Classrooms work has been built upon. One of the main mantras of all of this work is who you are is how you lead, but literally who we are is how we teach. And so one of the main concepts I want you to think about here is self-awareness. Because this morning, my goal is to activate some self-awareness and observation and curiosity building skills so that you can think, okay, what do I do on a daily basis? What am I paying attention to in my classroom? And this is also a quote from the Brené Brown group on her website, but this is the challenge that she has with the Daring Classrooms work. That we are ethically called to make our schools and classrooms places where all students can walk in and for that day or hour, take off the crushing weight of their armor, hang it on a rack, and open their heart to truly being seen. So I want you to absorb this for just a minute. And is there a word or phrase that stands out for you that's most important? So I want you to just think internally, do I agree with this? Does it challenge me? What are my thoughts about this? So I'd like to lead in with thoughts about teachers that you've had in the past. Have you ever walked into a classroom and it just seems kind of cloudy and dreary and you feel uncertain and you feel some fear? You're like, wow, what's going to happen in this classroom today? Do you also walk into classrooms in your past where it's pretty dry? It might be a little boring, the engagement is low, and there's just something that's not stimulating about that classroom. Or have you also had a teacher or been in a classroom where it's very sunny and everyone is able to grow at their own pace and in their own way, in their own direction? So think about that as we move forward, and those experiences that you've had most likely have shaped either who you want to be or who you don't want to be. Some of those anti-models can be even more powerful than the ones we lean into and those people who have guided us along the way. So I'm going to invite you to be curious, stay open-minded, think about the differences that classrooms have. I will tell you, I walked around Dwight on Friday, and many of you were on a ski trip, but I could still tell by walking around and looking at empty classrooms what the beliefs were about teaching and learning in those classrooms. And it was inspiring. So the first thing I'd like you to do is consider in this classroom, as you look at this image, if you were to walk into this classroom, how would you feel? So think for a minute, and then I'd like you to turn and talk to a person next to you. So if you're kind of far away, you might need to move a little bit. What are the words that would describe your feelings as you walked into this classroom? How would you feel?
Oh, yeah. But then other classes that oh.
Okay, let's hear from some of you. What were some of the feelings that you were talking about with each other? Just call them out as a popcorn call.
Bored.
Bored?
Lonely.
Lonely? How many people felt lonely? Bored?
Pressure because it looks like an exam situation.
Yeah, pressure, exam, fear, confused, uninspired. What's that again? Right, so you know, just based on your observations, you don't know anything about this teacher, right? But you know what it feels like to walk into a classroom like this. You know what to be prepared for. I don't see there's going to be a lot of dialogue. Okay? So the next part then is talk to your neighbor real quickly. What would you infer the values and beliefs of this person are?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Which is quiet equals good. Yeah. I'm the fun.
Okay, let's hear some values and beliefs, teacher. Listen and learn. What's that? Oh, like the bank, you just put it in. Yep, then I'm an empty bank and you're to fill me up.
So
Mhm.
that work, like on your own, work on your own.
Work on your own, individual, right?
Quiet equals good.
Quiet is good. Yes.
No distraction.
No distractions. Would it be pretty quiet in this classroom?
Yes.
Okay, we could infer that. Here's another one. Again, this one isn't for everyone either, but think about what would you feel walking into this classroom? Talk to your neighbor.
Stress.
Okay, let's hear some. What are the feelings you would have in this classroom? Encouraged? Appreciated? Excited?
Happy.
Happy? Collaborative? What's that?
Anxious for grade 1.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Afraid.
A little afraid? Yep. A little overwhelmed? Yeah. What else?
Gloomy.
What's that again?
Dark. Gloomy.
Dark, gloomy. Yeah, and that could just be the lighting in here. Yeah. So based on those, again, this. Some people seeing those balls for you to sit on makes you go, whoo. I don't think so. So again, this is maybe something you have to consider. So what I'm going to ask you now, again, what do you believe this teacher feels? What are their values and beliefs about teaching and learning? Okay, let's hear some values and beliefs about teaching and learning here. Collaborative.
The kids probably have some choice.
Choice. Yeah, I see some self-directedness a little bit in here. It looks like they can get around and choose some things. Anything else on this one?
Yeah, more student-centered.
Student-centric, okay.
Patriotic.
Patriotic? Yes, it is. Okay, let's look at one more. In this classroom, what would you feel?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, let's hear some. What do you feel in this classroom if you walked in? Was that modern? Yeah. What else? Engaged, absolutely. Challenged. Other things that you might feel? Collaborative, student-centered. Yeah, they seem excited. Like they are really problem resolving. And they're doing it together. So, let's infer. What are the values and beliefs, do you think, of this teacher? Absolutely, inquiry, yes. Mm-hmm. Okay, what are some of the values and beliefs that you think this teacher holds?
Productive struggle makes your brain grow.
Yeah, struggle. Absolutely. You want some cognitive dissonance. You want a little bit of a wrinkled brow, but not too much where it's into distress. What else do you think this teacher believes in?
Student voice.
Student voice, absolutely. Risk taking.
Also changing the space in the classroom.
Yeah, changing the space in the classroom. Where do you see that there's other spots and there's a desk back there?
Yeah, they're just kind of gathered around
Yeah.
areas out of their desks.
Mm-hmm.
Student agency.
Student agency, thank you. It's a great one. So with that, I want us to think about everything speaks. Everything we do on a daily basis, when we model what's in our classroom, is actually the foundation of teaching and learning. Because again, I can tell a lot about you by not even having you in the classroom in some regard. So keep thinking about that as we move forward. Because one of the mantras that the metaphor that we use in daring classrooms is the three-legged stool. And you may have seen this before in psychology, but in a daring classroom, I want you to think students and teachers are doing what? Well, one, many times we do think, do, think, do, think, do. And sometimes we may not pay attention to the feelings that come in that and the climate that we set and the tone that we set in the classroom. But it is literally the first thing entering your classroom that anyone can see and hear and feel. So every day, kids are walking in the school, you're walking in the school, and what comes with us every single day are feelings of shame, scarcity, fear, not enough, who do I think I am, I'm not good enough to be here. This is a season ticket holder, shame is. We can feel uncertain every day. I felt uncertain coming in here today. I feel afraid, yet brave at the same time. I'm curious to learn more about you and the things that you're doing as teachers and learners. So when we think about this, it's really important that every day kids are coming into our classrooms with this, but also the adults are. Again, shame is a season ticket holder that we take with us. It's that little inner voice in our head that says, who do we think we are and not good enough? So what are we doing on a daily basis to mitigate this? Because our overall goal when we walk into a classroom and we can feel like it's an arena is we want love, joy, and belonging. In particular, we are hardwired in our brains to make connections with people. So if I feel isolated and alone, what am I doing to help that and build those relationships? Because if my ultimate goal is belonging and joy and curiosity in the classroom, these are the things that will end up being there. And it's not that shame won't ever show up. It's just, what are we doing to mitigate that, to make sure that we're taking our armor off on a regular basis and we're focusing on these things? What are we observing around shame so that we can help kids be in rapport and collaborative? Because ultimately, we want more problem solving. We want ethical decision making. We want inclusion. So with that, I want you to keep thinking, what are the ways that we can be guardians that allow students to breathe, be curious, and to explore? So what I'd like you to do right now is turn and talk again. What are the ways that you're currently doing this in your classrooms and in your teams? Let's do a quick turn and talk on that.
I think they just realized anyway. They know about deep people are because they know about money or not.
Gesundheit.
Yeah.
I can.
Thanks, you. Okay, let's hear about some of the celebrations that you do on a daily basis that allow students to come in, be curious, and take their armor off. What are some of your thoughts? Love to hear that. And Michael's got the microphone.
My voice is loud enough. I think we're teachers of much younger kids, so this is such a natural learning experience for us every day. I think that there are limits to this because there's guidance that you have to give kids. You know, all kids, doesn't matter what age, they need a little bit of guidance in order to achieve the being curious, the exploration and everything. So I think it's something that we do pretty well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad you said that, because this afternoon we're going to dig more into boundaries and how you establish healthy boundaries for students. Because it can't just be a free-for-all. You need some structure so that we know what's going on and it feels safe. Absolutely. Someone else. Yes, we're back here. Yeah. Thank you.
The class that I teach one class. I'm a learning support teacher, but I do have a class of students that I teach, and it's relatively low stakes, relatively speaking, compared to some of the other learning that's going on in the school. And I don't tell them that it's low stakes, but I do tell them that it's necessary to be wrong. It's necessary to not get it right. And this is something that we work on together. I'm here, get it wrong. I want you, I'm okay with you getting it wrong, and we're gonna do it together. So that's something that I have to continually tell my students, just because of their makeup and their culture and things like that. But I do try to do that as much as possible.
Thank you so much for that. You're promoting that growth mindset. The failure is the first attempt in learning. Thank you. Who else might share one? We have one more? Thank you, Dave.
Thank you. Pretty simple, but just the practice of ending class on a question as opposed to an answer. So just teaching high school English, some of the subjects we cover, some of the debates that organically come up in class. I like to tell my students to embrace the ambiguity, as uncomfortable as that might be, but to if they leave the classroom with questions, that's probably a positive thing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Do we have one more here?
Different working spaces. So like, with like lap desks or like cushions in the classroom, or so like that they can choose a variety of places where they feel comfortable to work.
Absolutely. And having those spaces is so critical. We need to feel comfortable when we're learning. Thank you. Anything else? Good. Looking good on time. The last thing that we have then is I want to leave you again with this mantra. Every day, who we are is how we teach. So do a quick turn and talk. We've got about 1.5 minutes. What's your biggest takeaway from this morning in 25 minutes? What do you want to remember about what we've been talking about? Hey, let's hear some of those. Biggest takeaway from today, just this morning. And hopefully I'll see you in the afternoon session. We're going to talk about trust and rapport, some of my favorite topics. So biggest takeaways. We can call them out too. Yeah, that's okay.
Perfect time. But I guess for me, I think as I would give myself space to be human, that I also need to give kids space to be human. And hopefully by me giving them that room, they will also in return do that.
Thank you so much. Other takeaways? Let's get a couple more.
I've taken away that physical environment, external environment is important. Of course, it's a factor. But I also personally believe the internal environment you create in your mindset is just as important. You know, there's a reason why soldiers, for example, in very poor conditions can thrive, and people in very rich external environments can feel depressed. So, yeah, that's my takeaway.
Thank you so much. One more. Thank you.
I was one of the teachers who was gone last week with skiing with my students, and so for me, it's really interesting. I keep going back to, you know, what if you were in my classroom last week, what would you have seen? And really challenging myself and my students to have a reflection, like have our classroom be a reflection of our values and our goals, but also the way that we learn best. So for me, I just keep going back to wondering if you were there and what it would look like. So.
Thank you so much. All right, it's been such a pleasure facilitating the short keynote this morning. Hope to see you this afternoon. We'll dig in about for 90 minutes on trust and rapport and how that works in the classroom as well. So hopefully see you then, and thank you again.
Thanks again, Charlene.
You're welcome.
So if anyone wants to hear more about that, obviously there's the workshops this afternoon, but Jolene's also running a 2-day Dare to Lead workshop here at Dwight next weekend from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. on Saturday and Sunday. And you can go to cognitiveconsultancy.com to register. So register there if you would like to join that workshop. Our next keynote speaker is Katrina Daniel-Samasa. Katrina has worked in education for over 20 years in schools in the US, the UAE, and here in South Korea. She is trained in strengthening communities through restorative practices, social emotional learning, anti-bullying, and context-based and solution-driven leadership. In her current role as a workshop facilitator, Katrina focuses on helping schools and teams understand diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice for staff and students. Please welcome Katrina.
Am I there? Can you see me? And can you hear me? Okay, so I hear a laugh in the background. That means that you can hear me. At any point that you cannot hear me, please let me know. First of all, I am excited to be here. As was stated, I worked in South Korea. I am connecting with you from the UK, where I have been here doing some research for a book for the last 6 months, and I will be in the US soon. So let's get started. We're talking about strengthening communities. And before I get into that, my work is really based on building climate and culture in schools and building that relational capacity and community within international schools. A lot of times we tend to, well, not we, but a lot of times in international schools, we invite people to come in and do these wonderful workshops. And a lot of times they're from the West, but we know international schools have nuances like no other. So as part of what I'll do this afternoon is really speak to those nuances. But for right now, I am going to share my video and get started. Okay. And I think you all can see that. All right, so let's get started. Unfortunately, I'm not there, so I can't really interact in the ways that I normally do. But we'll see later on if someone could get a microphone and kind of walk around so we can do a bit of interaction. So culture and community, strengthening communities and DEI, how does it relate? So instead of speaking to you, I want to ask you a few key questions. So this really will be about me asking you questions to ignite your own personal thought, and we'll delve into more this afternoon. Again, I am Katrina Daniel Samasa. If after this session you want to connect with me, LinkedIn is the best. So if you don't have a LinkedIn, I'm sure that Sarah can pass along my email if you need that. But this is not about me, so let's keep going. So here are a few agreements. All the time before I do any type of workshop, I like to start with the agreements, the things that really I want you to agree to. Usually I do a community exercise, but we can't do that. So the first thing I want you to do is relax. We are community. There are zero judgments here. There is no question that is a dumb question. There are no questions that I feel I don't have any bias towards your questions, so feel free to ask any questions. Secondly, I'm going to ask you, as Jolene did earlier, to be open-minded, have open-mindedness. A lot of times we tend to lead with our biases, and we are all biased, by the way. Having biases doesn't make us good or bad. It's just a reality. So let's really have some intentionality as it relates to really deconstructing our own biases as we go through this. Deconstruct and recognize them, and I've already talked about that. Just recognize that we all have biases and it's okay, okay? And as my grandma used to say, eat the fish and spit out the bones. So with every workshop, every presentation, every keynote, there are parts where you're like, I don't know about that. That doesn't mean that what the person says overall is not valuable. So find value in something that is said today. And lastly, enjoy. Let's have fun. It's really, really hard for me to have fun while I'm sitting on my sofa and it's 11. However, we're going to try to have some fun and do some interaction, hopefully. Okay, so I'm going to start with quotes. What I want you to do, and I apologize for the wordiness of this, and usually I have things translated in the mother tongue of the country that's the host country. So I do apologize for those of you for the Korean speakers, because typically I would get it translated, but I didn't have the time this time around. So what I want you to do is think about the quotes. And I want you to think about the one that resonates most with you. These are quotes that have to do with climate, culture, and international school/school leadership. And I will read them to those who are our auditory learners. The idea that we're capable as human beings of perfect ethicality, of being as perfectly ethical all the time as we imagine ourselves to be, is a unicorn-like idea. The truth is, all of us sometimes inflate the invoice or stereotype the student or favor the friend, the person you mean to be. That is from that particular text. And I chose this quote because sometimes we think that when we're biased, or somebody who's biased, or somebody who's racist, or somebody who leads with stereotypes, we tend to make it black and white. That's a bad person, right? I highly recommend that book, The Person You Mean to Be, because it really begins to show us that us being human is not a bad thing. It's understanding our humanity, identifying where we have flaws, and then trying to live in a way so that we're not leading with those flaws. Of course. All right. Others see us not through the gauzy glow of our own self-regard, and not just through our words and actions, but also through the words and actions we don't take. And this is in line with, I'm a good person. I am a good person. I really am not a bad person. Well, again, it's not that black and white. It's not about good or bad. It's, do our actions match our words, right? We tend to see things happening around us, and sometimes we don't do anything about it, me included. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. That's community. Community is caring, not knowledge. Inaction is also a teacher. So what we don't do teaches those in our community what we accept and what we are willing to accept. Schools are a mirror of society and a catalyst for change. So this is the good thing for all of us in schools. Sometimes we are a microcosm for what is not that great in our societies. But on the flip side, we are also, or we can be, a catalyst for change. It's up to us. Power is not some finite resource that's going to run out in a few years. Power won't disappear because someone else is breathing it. And this was from a, it wasn't a TED Talk. I think it was a New York Times. Anyway, it's on YouTube, so you can look up this young lady's name. You can look this YouTube video up by her name. And I say this to say that when we're building community, it's not about this hierarchical approach. It's not about who's the boss and who's not the boss, and this is where I am in the hierarchy. It's about sharing power, because we understand that power is not finite, right? If trust is the currency of change, then high trust environments are quite wealthy. So I want you to think about this. When we talk about community, and we like to throw this word around a lot, especially within schools, but we don't really do the work that it takes to build intentional community. So when we think about our community, do we trust everyone? And when I talk about community, school communities, I'm talking about the security guard who greets the students in the morning. I'm talking about the canteen or cafeteria worker. I'm talking about the cleaners in the building. I'm talking about every single person, the parents. Are they part of your community? That's something that I want you to think about. Again, I'm here to just question and ask questions so that you can begin to have some insights and reflect on who you are. So what is community? I want you to think about your school, wherever your school is, and what do you deem as community? And I'm going to ask for some help here, if you don't mind. So if someone could grab the microphone for me, please, and to go out into the audience. I am going to beg and plead with you at 12:13 a.m. my time for a few volunteers, if that's okay. Can I have 2 volunteers to tell me what is community as it relates to your particular school? What do you think community is? And just 1 or 2 volunteers.
Hi, I think community is the people who work here, the kids who come to school, the families of the kids who come to school, and it can extend to the people who work here's families as well, because it impacts all of us.
Absolutely. What is your name?
Sarah.
Hi, Sarah. Thank
Hi.
you, Sarah, for answering. Are you the Sarah who helped put
am.
this event together?
Hi.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I appreciate you, and I appreciate all the work you've done to put this together. Absolutely. Now, here's a question I don't want you to answer. When was the last time you brought all of those entities together to talk about and help define who you are? Just think about it. If all of those people are part of your community, are you training them on the guidelines of your community? Have you brought them in to help define and shape your community? Or have you said to them, hi, welcome to where we are, welcome to who we are, and we need you to acclimate to us without you even adding to what we've defined as community? Just think about it, okay? I think Sarah answered this. Who is in our community? All of those specific entities are part of your community. So when you're talking about strengthening your community, have you tapped into all of those aspects of the community? Are they here in the audience? Again, just a question, okay? How do we value the people in our community? And my experiences in international schools and schools in general, and some cultures, right? Some cultures have a hierarchy of kind of authority, right? And we have to respect that. At the same time, within our international schools, we can create our own community that's an amalgamation of all of the different cultures and ethnicities that are represented within our community. So our international schools may not be a microcosm of the larger society because we're operating differently. When I was in South Korea, I was told, and I did a little bit of research, and it's true. South Korea and Japan are two of the most homogenous countries in the world. Most international schools are not as homogenous as the outside community, which means that you may not be a microcosm of the outside society, and that's okay. Think about it. How do the people in our community feel? It's so funny. I was at a school and I asked this question: how do the people in your community feel? Oh, we're fine. I said, how do you know? I mean, we all right here, we're all good. And I was like, okay, that's cool, but it's like 10 of you here. What about the rest? Well, the majority of us, when you're talking about inclusion and belonging, you're not talking about the majority of us. You're talking about if one of us hurts, we all hurt. That's community. Community is not the same as a democracy. It's not the same as, well, the majority feels. It's actually quite the opposite. It's thinking about what the minority feels. It's not excluding them. And when I say minority, I'm not talking about people, I'm talking about in number, right? So whatever the minority in number, what do they feel? Are they included? And if so, how are they included? How are they valued? Again, I ask a whole lot of questions that I just really want you to think about. So how can we strengthen our community? And for me, since you've invited me to Dwight, I'm part of your community right now. So I'm going to say our, because it's our community. At this point, I have a stake in our community. So how can we strengthen it? Okay. So the first thing is to acknowledge my existence. I love to hate when people say, I don't see your color, Katrina. I'm like, well, it's part of who I am. Why are you blind to it? It's okay. It's okay to see my color. It's okay to see that my hair is different than some people. It's okay that I'm different. That's what we need to start doing. When we talk about community, we're talking about celebrating us, not just for our sameness, but also the diversity of thought, the diversity of look, the diversity of the community. Recognize that our individual membership is important to the collective. I was a DEI lead at a school, and I remember purposely inviting people to be a part of the diversity, equity, and inclusion work at our school in South Korea. And I remember one person emailed and said, yes, I'm excited. And I was so excited for this person. And they emailed and said, oh, you know what? I see that it's mostly teachers and leaders. And I don't think I'm supposed to be on that. I'm just a ... I'm just a. Do people in your community feel like they're just a? It broke my heart. If anyone in your community feels like that, it should break your heart. Nobody should be just a, okay? Every single person, specifically in a school community, is important. Acknowledge the differences in our belief systems. I always think about a friend of mine who prefers to eat with their hands. That's their preferred method of eating. Wherever they are, whoever they're with, that's their preferred method. If someone is in the canteen and they're eating with their hands, would that be a problem? Something to think about. Is that proper? Is it improper? Who determines what's proper and improper? Again, something to think about. Ask me if I'm okay if I'm not where I normally am. You can really begin to measure a school's community-ness. Yes, I made that up. Based on how people respond when people are missing. I was at a school, I was with my husband at the time, and he was in surgery, and I got an email that said, "Where are you now?" in all caps, from a leader of the school who, I guess there was some miscommunication. So one leader hadn't connected with the other leader to tell them that I was in surgery, life-threatening. And that was the email that I got. That's not community. But it's in a school that believes, or it was in a school that believed that they were great. And that wasn't a great experience. So really, do you ask, where are you? Or do you ask, are you okay? Is there something that I can do for you? I know that you are usually where you're supposed to be. Again, strengthening our community. Realize that fairness doesn't mean equal. So what does this look like? This looks like the teacher who may have cancer, and these are real situations. This looks like the teacher who may have cancer who has to leave early every day, maybe for a week or for 2 weeks for chemotherapy, or because the person is ill. To have other people say, well, that's unfair. Why does she get to leave early? Is that community? Again, asking questions. Let me be my authentic self. And of course, we're talking about within the context of a professional environment, right? But it's important that people can be themselves without judgment. That's so, so important. So if I talk about being Muslim and going to the mosque, if I talk about being Christian and going to my church, I'm not talking about religious debates. I'm talking about just people being themselves and talking about if I'm a part of the LGBTQIA plus community and I say that my spouse, or I'm a woman and I say my wife, that there is no judgment being passed. And lastly, recognize the humanity in all of us. We're all human. We're flawed. We make mistakes. There are things that happen to us that cause us to be a certain way. I want us to really begin to understand that when we talk about community, we're not talking only about the what people do, but the why they do it. And when we delve into the why people do the things they do, then we can understand and see the humanity in each other. That's community. So what I want to talk about is, the last thing I want to really talk about is within international school communities, building intentional communities. And we'll delve into that later. And when we talk about intentional communities, we're talking about intentional communities of belonging. So again, I'm going to ask you a few questions. One, when you came to your school or institution or your organization, whatever it may be, were you asked your opinions on the culture of the school? Well, what do you think about this? What is your ideas relating to this? What I remember in all of my international schools is the induction week or the welcome week that was me being bombarded with so much information about the school that I wasn't valued as a professional coming into the school and adding to the culture of the school. I just had to acquiesce to what was already there. So again, how am I an active member of the community in that way? The last thing that I want to do is go back to, and I'm going to, the quotes. And I would like for you guys to take a look at them and just have one or two people, and then I'll end and see you this afternoon where we will take a deep dive into school culture. Which of these quotes resonates more with you and why? And if I could just have two people in the audience. Again, I apologize, I'm not there. I am a very, I usually walk around the stage and walk around the audience, but can't do that in this room, in this living room. So if somebody could walk around and just get two voices of which quote resonates with you and why.
We have a customer.
Thank you, whoever that is. Thank you for volunteering today.
I would say that the first one resonates with me the most because it's sort of referencing that, you know, I can keep trying, keep working at it to make sure that I'm improving.
Thank you. I appreciate your comment. What's your name?
Katie.
Heidi?
Katie.
Oh. Can you spell it for me?
Sorry. Oh,
Katie.
Okay, I wanted to make sure I heard it right. Thank you so much, Katie, and you have a great rest of your day. One more, just one more.
Hi, my name is Melissa. I'm one of the PYP teachers here at Dwight. The quote I chose was, "Inaction is also a teacher." And I think that is really valuable because not only does it help you understand the beliefs and values of those with whom you're working, but it also helps you to learn about your own students and why they may or may not respond to different things in ways that you would expect them to respond. And then you can dive deeper into what those motivations were. So you might actually uncover that something deeper might be going on. So not only is it a teacher for us as professionals, but also with respect to our classroom and that rapport building.
Absolutely. And, you know, I wanted to add to that also is understanding the cultural context in the students that we're dealing with. I know as Westerners, we have certain expectations of how students should respond, but culturally, the students do have different norms at home that we have to acknowledge, respect, and sometimes students just have to learn how to code switch. So thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you all in my workshop this afternoon. I appreciate your attention, and I will see you later. Thank you so much. I appreciate you all, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Katrina. I think as international school educators, we're all very well aware of the culture of our host country as well as the school culture and how those are intertwined and influenced by each other. But ultimately, it comes down to how are we considering how we build a culture and climate of inclusion, and how are we creating the capacity for a community where everyone belongs. So it'll be interesting for us to dig in deeper later this afternoon. So thank you, Katrina. Up next, we welcome Beth Puma, another Beth. That's exciting for me. Beth is currently an instructional coach at the American School of Japan, and she serves as a coordinator for the Japan chapter of the English Language Learning Specialists in Asia. With a passion in language and culture's role in education, Beth is an expert in transforming instructional practices by understanding students' multilingual experiences. And today, we warmly welcome Beth as she speaks to us about translanguaging. So please welcome Beth.
Good morning, everybody. I'm here in my living room from Tokyo. I'm excited to be here. Thank you to Jolene and Katrina. Loved the work, and I see the threads of connection between all of our work. So it's been a pleasure already this morning. I'm going to be talking about translanguaging for dynamic multilingual ecosystems, and really this idea of understanding flow with the dynamicness of our students' multilingual identities. But first, I love stories, and let's hear a little story. Let's hear a little story, shall we?
My name, when I started kindergarten, was Ramon. And by the time I was in the second grade, everybody was calling me Raymond. You know, out in the playground, in the classroom, Raymond, hey, Raymond, hey, Raymond. And trying to adjust to this, you know what I mean? And if there was a girl named Maria, her name became Mary. And Juanita became Jane. Till one day, we got a new student by the name of Facundo Gonzalez. Facundo Gonzalez, man. When he came into school, we noticed they called it an emergency administrative meeting. You kind of hear him talking to the door. What are we going to do with this guy, man? You know what I mean? How are we going to change his name, you know? And one teacher goes, well, you know what? Why don't we try to shorten the name a little bit? And they go, yeah, well, but how do you spell it? Facundo. They go, why don't we just spell it F-A-C? And one of the teachers, well, that means his name would be Fac. And the other teacher looked at it, no, that sounds too much like a dirty word. You can't be saying Fac. Where's your homework, you know? Where's Fac at? You know what I mean? So that was a trip we always remember going to elementary school, because Facundo was the only guy who never got his name changed.
Did she just drop the F word in the first 2 minutes of her keynote? 100% I did. But as you can see, Facundo had a story of his name and that resonated with his community. I invite you to think about, what's the story of your name? A name is a parent's first gift to their child. Turn and talk. Share with somebody. What's the story of your name? I wish I could be there in community with you right now, but we're in community through the virtual space. And although I couldn't hear all the stories, and I know it was a quick turn and talk for sure, here's what I did hear from my computer. I heard laughter and I heard connection, right? So stories are a huge part of building community. And our names and our languages have stories to themselves. So just something to note, even through the virtual space, I heard laughter and connection. Another quick story from the book, My Name is Yoon. It talks about a girl from South Korea moving to the United States and what those early experiences were for her. Soon you will go to your new school. You must learn to print your name in English, he said. This is how it looks. Y-O-O-N. I wrinkled my nose. I did not like Yoon, lines and circles, each standing alone. My name looks happy in Korean, I said. The symbols dance together. And in Korean, my name means shining wisdom. I like the Korean way better. Well, you must learn to write it this way. Remember, even when you write in English, it still means shining wisdom. So this is just a children's book that talks about this young girl's journey through the immigrant experience, through the language experience. And I use this a lot when talking with teachers and parents. So just another name around stories. Another story around names. So stories provide us mirrors into our own experience, windows into our community members' experience, and sliding glass doors to build connection. And this comes from the work of Ruth Sims Bishop. These are just a few of some narrative texts that talk about that name. Talk about what a name means to a person and their whole line of ancestors and cultural identities and rumblings into the future. So these are just a few of some name texts that I wanted to share with you all. And we would call these identity texts in the sense of it's about a student or a person rumbling with the complexities and ever-changing identities. All of these ones in particular have to do in some way with name and language learning. So language is inherently tied to a child's or to a person's identity. And I'm gonna, if you haven't read this book, Growing Up in Transit by Danao Tanu, highly recommend, highly recommend. Here is one quote about the language and identity that she saw and observed and talked to students in international school where she was doing her site of research. I invite you to read the quote. I use this quote for a lot of reasons, but this, again, the idea of the language we speak and the accent we speak tell a story of where we have been and where we are going. And we cannot leave that at the door as we enter into classrooms. A little bit about me though, before we engage in this work together, because I am a teacher, I am a coach. But where did I start? Okay, here is young Beth on a hike in Tucson, Arizona. I wasn't living in Tucson, Arizona at the time. Look at that young idealism. I knew I wanted to be a change maker. I was a young activist. I saw education as a place to help build a better world. Look at that youthful, idealistic smile. Okay. I started my teaching career in New York City. I am from New York and New Jersey. And so in New York City, it is one of the most linguistically diverse places in the United States. all of those colors represent different home language use. And yeah, that was my reality, right? So even if I was working in a neighborhood that had concentrated of one language, this is the world that my students were interacting with every day. For a million reasons not to get into in this keynote, I moved out to Tucson, Arizona, where very much immigration policies and xenophobic rhetoric control politics, and that trickles down into the language policies of the schools. Dual language education was outlawed. Ethnic studies was outlawed. So this was the climate in where I really came to understand how language intersects with schools. At the same time, my students were multilingual, and when I was in community with parents, that was a part of our experience. So you cannot separate the political ideals of different systems from the language and how it manifests in your classroom. And so there were a lot of negative ideas about linguistic identity in Arizona schools. Okay, then I went overseas, and my first overseas experience was at 100% immersion school. So students were speaking, were different proficiencies of English starting in 9th grade and graduating with AP diplomas. It was an incredible catalyst project, and I am so grateful. And there were 1,000 reasons for that project to fail, okay? And it didn't. It's school still, it was in southern China. And even teachers that had been hired knowing the catalyst of, we are going to have an immersive environment with rigorous content. Even in our work together, we had to disrupt and interrogate our own monolingual biases, even though we said, yes, we want to work with English language learners, right? It was a school founded on co-teaching and immersion practices, and it has shaped my belief. I had that belief before, but I really had that belief that kids can do amazing things when provided a loving, nurturing, scaffolded community. And a little bit personal. This is Giuseppe and Nunziata Falco. These are my great-grandparents. I've never met them. In fact, I didn't even know their real names were Giuseppe and Nunziata. I always knew of them as Joseph and Nancy. And for some reason in our family history, we lost my heritage language of Italian. In fact, we lost my great-grandparents' names. I knew them as Joseph and Nancy. And so I will never have a heritage language of Italian anymore. It will now always be a world language of which I have to learn, besides a few choice words, but otherwise that language was disciplined out of my family in the name of assimilation, in the name of violence, in the name of all these different questions that as a family, they chose to give up their heritage language for their children. And there's grief in that. And so particularly to my friends of European Western descent who wouldn't normally consider themselves bilingual or wouldn't normally understand, or, I invite you to interrogate where in your history was there a loss of language? Because the history of international schools and the history of the spread of English throughout our society, there is loss that goes there. So an essential question, and we will be diving deeper during our time together this afternoon. How can our schools and classrooms cultivate, that's an active verb, my friends, a loving, nurturing, and empowering multilingual ecosystem where multilingual students thrive? Too often, international schools or our schools where we, from our home countries, subscribe to a subtractive idea of bilingualism. And this can be as plain as we speak English here, but even how we talk about our kids in our areas. They don't speak any English. They're behind, they're 3 grade levels behind. Fix them, you fix them here, then they can come here into my class. It's a very medical model and it's a subtractive deficit rooted model. So what would it look like in an additive model of multilingualism? Well, language is a resource, and this is where this is one way translanguaging can come in. to play. It's not that they're learning English, they're learning another language. And then we can leverage the power of a home language. But let's go deeper, shall we? Because we have to know our history. Here's a picture of the Carlisle Indian Boarding School in Pennsylvania in the USA. This is a school, like many other schools in the United States during this time period, that took children or pressured parents, sometimes stolen, sometimes pressured, to take children away from their home communities on their indigenous communities. And then they were schooled, right? And this comes from the federal policy of the United States to kill the Indian and save the child. Students were forced and given anglicized names. They had to dress in a Western manner. Their hair was cut. These were also the signs of horrific abuse. And when my graduate advisor, and when I went to university, she showed this picture. She said, "What's the one thing I notice? It's a school and there's no kids smiling." And so even though at the time smiling in portraits was not a thing, I understand the time context. This was a school and there's no children smiling. And we've only still uncovering some of the terrible abuse that happened at these schools. So schools can be a place of harm. I recently was giving a talk around translanguaging and multilingual identities at just like last month at a school in Taiwan. And the head of school came up to me after, just loving the talk and the work, and he said, "You know, I am the last of a generation that experienced the Welsh knot." And I knew there was policies in Wales imposed around Welsh language use, but I didn't know what the Welsh knot was. And he told me the story of, you know, if kids got caught speaking Welsh, they'd have to wear this Welsh knot. And it was meant to shame the child for speaking Welsh. And at his school, you know, if a kid, they then had kids like put it on each other when they heard another peer speak Welsh. And at the end of the day, whoever had the Welsh knot received some form of corporal punishment. Now, this was a head of school who wasn't that old. So even though this policy was taken off the books in the 1940s, here is someone who experienced this in the 70s and 80s still. So another example where language is used to discipline. And the reality is, despite the immense value of languages, more than half of all languages are in danger of failing or disuse, with devastating impacts for the global linguistic diversity. And I would extend that thought further, that the cultural ways of being. See, if English is treated as the only significant language in school, children will try to construct monolingual identities. I love this tweet. So this is where translanguaging can disrupt that monolingual identity, disciplining that schools where English is the medium of instruction happen. See, I don't want a school where English is the language of instruction, of learning. Whether or not it's the medium of instruction is another idea. And we still see this. We still see this whether in the physical form of a sign, or we see this in the disciplining of ourselves, right? In how we talk to each other, or how kids discipline themselves into this idea of, you can't speak this language. So what does it mean to be bilingual? An old way of thinking is that it was language one with all the forms and features of that language, plus language two with all the forms and features of that language. And there were two distinct buckets in the head. Well, we know this is not true, but this is what many monolingual speakers think, that this is what it means to be bilingual. See, to become bilingual is this third space. And this is where dynamic multilingualism comes from, right? The people are going to use whatever language, whatever word, whatever fits the context to make meaning of the world around them and communicate. That is what the brain does. And there's much smarter people than me around neurolinguistics that have studied this and watched the brain, okay? But this is the ecological model we're striving for, where children and teachers can make meaning together, can tell stories together in a way that is effective and use their full linguistic repertoire to build community as well. So translanguaging, according to Dr. Garcia out of the CUNY Graduate Center in New York, is two things. It's around the corriente, right? Corriente can mean a flow of a river, okay? It also can be the flow of electrons. It's a movement, right? So it's students' translanguaging performance. It's what their brains do, whether we put rules to restrict it or not. The brain's gonna do what the brain's gonna do. But it's also partnered with teaching, with a teacher's translanguaging pedagogy. And that's really the heart of my work today. Okay, baby step. This is something you could do next week. What does your morning meeting for those in elementary school look like, or for the advisory? What does those initial meetings look like? A very simple step to make sure that students see their full linguistic repertoire as part of a community space is what are the linguistic repertoires and what are words we can learn of our peers. There's the sliding glass door metaphor. Okay, so here are two amazing elementary teachers, but this very easily could work in an advisory or pastoral setting in the secondary. Okay, what's your morning meeting? Okay, partnering with parents and tapping into funds of knowledge, right? Our parents are highly educated, highly excited to be full language repertoire, right? So here is an example of an illustration study that a first grade teacher did around SEL words. So proud was one of the words, like helping children develop nuance for their feeling words. So the kids had to draw it, they had to take a picture with it, right? And then the teacher invited the parents into the Google slide deck. These are the languages of this classroom. And so now aren't we not only learning the word and its complexities in English, we're seeing the connections in the languages of our home, and we're partnering with parents. What would this look like in a economics unit or a theory of knowledge unit, right? So even though my examples, I have been in elementary the last 8 years, I'm going to invite our secondary people to think, what would this look like? And this is like baby step number 2, right? There's way other ways we can tap into funds of knowledge. It's a whole workshop. Okay, sharing with a multilingual audience. Okay, so here's a first grade example. Here's a 5th grade example. When we think about the complexity of sharing with an audience for impact, that's a lot of different standards or concepts across different curriculums in international schools, that you can speak with impact or you can write with impact. Well, this little darling was writing a how-to book, I think How to Buy a Frog. Okay, very real for a first grader. And so she wrote in English, but then she said, well, I want my mom to read it. So she translated it into Japanese, which was her home language. That is depth, not just of 2 language forms, but thinking about audience. The other one is from my co-teacher. We did this whole unit on debate and using your words to make change, tied it to the UN goals. And so it was about single-use plastics. This child decided they wanted to make a change, make a small impact on the use of single-use plastics. They decided they wanted to go to the top and they wanted to write to Prime Minister Kishida. Prime Minister Kishida, his target, they wanted to communicate in Japanese. So obviously, a lot of the work was in English, but based on audience, okay, they moved into Japanese. This is translanguaging. It's dynamic. It's not the end all, and it's not just to get them to the finish line. going to skip that one just because we're slowing down on time, but I'll add it into my workshop. The biggest question I get around translanguaging is, how do we know what they're talking about? How much is too much? These are questions I hear a lot. And so I invite you to disrupt that monolingual bias. Make space for wrestling with concepts in any language. If the output is English, then we will scaffold towards proficiency there, okay? But make space and be curious. Well, what if there's a bullying situation? Isn't that not inclusive if we're speaking in a language, okay? Be curious. We know when kids are not being kind. We know when kids are off task. I see that 5% of the time of when kids are making meaning in another language. And that would be happening in English too, right? So if that's the case, we address the kindness, we address the bullying, right? But what kids do is when they're dealing with a tough concept, their brain is automatically going to move into a language that comes easier to them because they're wrestling conceptually. I saw this all the time when I taught secondary. When they were in the middle of a calculus problem, the Chinese and Mandarin and Cantonese was flying around, right? And then eventually, once they had figured out the calculus problem, it then moved to the scaffolds that got the output into English. This makes monolingual teachers uncomfortable. Trust your students here. So just to flip it in reverse, this picture is from a Japanese class where, the Japanese teachers are told target language 90% of the time, right? The unit of study was around proverbs. And so the kids were trying to make meaning, and the kids had just pulled paper and were trying to make meaning of what they already knew. These were 5th graders. They knew a lot about figurative language and idioms and expressions based on them being young people on this planet for 10 to 11 years, where they only knew a couple proverbs in Japanese. And so then the teacher comes to me, she says, "This is too much English for Japanese class." I said, "No, this is the launching point. They're trying to make meaning." So now we can know where we need to explicitly teach some Japanese, right? But conceptually, they understand what you were going for, because we were curious and we listened and we observed. And finally, the power of versus the, okay? Very classic Western story mountain, story arc of how narratives go. I've seen teachers talk about this as this is the end all stories are like this. That's not true, okay? Stories are culturally constructed. So here's an example in Japanese, what a very traditional story mountain or story flow would look like. So it's not that one is wrong or right. It's a story, a way stories are organized versus the way stories are organized. I leave you with 2 thoughts. I promise my workshop will be more interactive. It's so tricky to do this from far away. And this is from the writer, philosopher, change maker, bell hooks. But love is really more of an interactive process. It's about what we do and not just what we feel. It is a verb, not a noun. I think about verbs a lot. And so I wanted to leave you with some parting verbs. To interrogate. Interrogate your own monolingual bias. Interrogate what makes you uncomfortable when hearing students talk in another language in your classroom. Interrogate your own language learning journey. Disrupt systems that uphold linguistic inequity. To listen to your students, to observe, to notice, to cultivate a dynamic multilingual ecology, to flow with that in the corriente, as we talked about, to be curious and to be dynamic, and finally, to love. Translanguaging pedagogy is a brave act of love. And so I invite you to be in that space with your students as you build community and you work from the day to day, that to love your students is to love their full linguistic identity as well. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for that, Beth. Personalised learning is one of our pillars of education here at Dwight, and having an understanding of students' home languages and their identities is such an important part of that. So that was really great. Thank you again to all of our keynote speakers. We'll have an opportunity to continue learning from Jolene, Katrina and Beth during the 90-minute workshops at 1:20. We have an exciting day ahead of us, as you can see from the schedule. Refreshments will be available between sessions on the second floor. Now, I think, hopefully I get this part right, that the next session probably starts in about 10 minutes, and it's going to be the Pecha Kucha sessions. Those who are attending Pecha Kucha A can stay here, and if you're in Pecha Kucha B, you can go up to the 4th floor gallery for that session. And Pecha Kucha presenters can get ready now. For those of you that are joining us here as guests today, if you'd like a tour of the school, a quick tour of the school, you can meet Beth Overby, the lower school principal, at about 12:50 at the second floor snack table as well. Okay. For those of us joining us online, you need to switch over now to Zoom. Registered online attendees will have received Zoom links for the various workshop sessions via email.
Recording stopped.
And thank you, and please enjoy the rest of today's sessions.
The Ed Events community is coming soon, the go-to destination for educators seeking the latest education events, solutions and jobs. Explore new opportunities by registering your interest at ed.events. Discover conferences, webinars, interviews, demos and explore forums where you can expand your professional connections. The community's mission is to bring together schools and organisations that perform stronger together. Register your interest in becoming a founding member. Teachers join for free. The Ed Events community. Register now at ed.events.